Nazirei is a biblical expression used to refer to a person who is attached to a special vote of consecration to God. It is not possible to know for sure when this practice, the vote of the Nazite, arose, but it seems that its origin is pre-Mosaic, that is, which arose before Moses' time. The Nazi vote was usually done voluntarily and comprised only a specific period of time. But there are biblical references that show that parents could also consecrate their children as Nazareans for a lifetime. So in these cases, the person was a Nazireo throughout his life, not just during a specific period. And the best known case in this regard was that of sanction, as we read in Judges chapter 13. And the word Nazirei means something as consecrated or separate. And this word comes from the Hebrew Nazir, which derives from the root Nazar, which means separating, consecrating, or abstracting. And sometimes the Hebrew word for diadema is also applied to refer to the long and characteristic hair of the Nazarians. Well, then the Nazir one was a special vote of consecration to God, who could last a lifetime or just a period of life. And the Nazirei was the one who made this vote, right? But what was the Nazirei vote? How did this work? Well, due to its consecration, a Nazireo should comply with a series of restrictions. A series, really, okay? Chapter 6 of the Numbers book provides the base text that helps us to understand what the Nazirei vote was like. In fact, we can even say that this chapter records a complete legislation of the Nazi, and in it we can highlight the following. Firstly, the Nazareans should adopt total abstinence of wine and any other yeast drink. And in relation to fruit of the vid, the grape, this prohibition was not restricted only to wine. In fact, it also included grape juice and grape itself, both fresh and raisins. This is there in Numbers chapter 6, between verses 3 and 4. So, similarly to what was happening with an official priest, the renunciation of wine by Nazireo was made so that he could approach God's more worthy. It's true. Secondly, the Nazirians could not cut their hair either during the period of their vote of separation. Biblical text makes this very clear in Numbers 6, verse 5. Thirdly, who made that vow of the Nazi? Nazi could not approach a dead body, not even if it were your nearest relative. Okay? Then, during the Nazi vote, approaching a corpse would imply contamination. And if the Nazirei violated this rule, he should undergo a detailed purification ritual and start all over. Good. And at the end of the vote of Nazirus was also a special procedure. And in this procedure, several prescribed offers and sacrifices should be offered. And besides, the Nazi that finished his vote also had to scrape his head and burn his cut hair on the altar. And of course, this whole process was properly carried out by a priest, okay? An official priest. And after all this procedure was completed, so the Nazireo was free from your vote. So, in short, it is possible to say that unlike other votes, the Nazi was implied in a total consecration to God. The Nazi's body was completely separated for holy service, so that this kind of consecration was similar to that was experienced only by priests. It's true? Well, for us to end here, we can highlight some people in the Bible that were Nazareans. Who in the Bible was involved with the Nazarian vote? The best known story, in fact, is that of Samson. He was consecrated by his parents since his birth, as we read in Judges chapter 13. Prophet Samuel is also another character that is usually related to the Nazarian vote. Although Samuel is not explicitly called Nazireo in the Old Testament's Hebrew text, it has been widely accepted by scholars who, in fact, Samuel would have been a Nazi, and this conclusion is mainly taken from Anna's description. Samuel's mother. There in the first book of Samuel, chapter 1, verse 22, Anna says the following, "When the boy is weaned, then I will take him to appear before the Lord, and he will live there forever." Anna referring to the fact that her son would dwell before God for all his life. And this phrase, "he will live there forever," can also be understood as a Naziru forever, every day of his life. But it is also true that some interpreters make certain objections about the Samson and Samuel. In Samson's case, some claim that the narrative of his life clearly seems to demonstrate that he does not abstain from wine, and that it might mean that Samson was not a lifelong Naziru. But, on the other hand, it seems that Samson's case only demonstrates how much he broke the rules of his vote, and consequently, he was disapproved by God due to his disobedience. Well, another character that is also considered by many to have been a Nazirei is Absalom, the son of King David. This is usually speculated by the fact that Absalom had very long hair. Well, anyway, in fact, the Nazirei was a very common vote in Israel. In the days of the prophet Ammaz, the biblical narrative seems to indicate that the Nazareans were very numerous. Even the apostate people tried to force the Nazareans to deviate from the abstinence rule of their vote. They insisted that the Nazareans took wine. This we can read there in Ammaz chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. Finally, there in the New Testament, in Acts chapter 18, verse 8, biblical text provides evidence of the possibility of the Apostle Paul made a temporary vote of Nazi. The text says that in Cenchrea, Paul shaved his head because he had a vow. Ahead, still in the book of Acts of the Apostles, Paul was persuaded to finance the final sacrifices of Nazarite vote made by 4 Jewish believers. Then, together with them, Paul should participate in the purification ritual. And that was a common situation of that time. The richest Jews who had more conditions often paid for the sacrifices required at the end of the Nazi vote. And only to conclude here, there is also a suggestion defended by some scholars that the prophet John the Baptist and James, brother of Jesus, would also have been Nazareans, but there is no really evidence of that.